Hey everybody, welcome. Bedbug Guy is here. Today I want to talk about the ancient Egyptian criminal justice system because they did have more or less a sophisticated one because uh, laws and law enforcement and a judicial system are critical pretty much to any advanced civilization, and the Egyptians were no different. Now, the original codified law was under Hammurabi, and that had a list of specific crimes and specific punishments for those crimes. The Egyptians didn't really codify it that much. They really operated on more or less a basic set of laws tied to their religion. The usual: no lying, no cheating, no stealing, no assault, no murder. And then also there were uh, laws that were given by the pharaoh. Those would often be codified as far as scribes writing them down, and those could change from pharaoh to pharaoh. Now, pharaoh was the head of law enforcement in the land, so he was the top dog. Um, but as far as did they have a police force? Yes, and it kind of morphed over time, and it began in the Old Kingdom with basically nobles and the king hiring bodyguards to at least uh, keep law and order within their sphere of influence. And then in the fifth dynasty, Pharaoh started to hire like ex-military, and city officials used to hire maybe ex-military people from different lands to kind of patrol the city as some sort of security enforcement. And the most popular one ended being Nubian warriors, and they were called Magi, and they kind of patrolled with wooden staffs, and they also used, as it turns out, dogs and monkeys to help apprehend criminals. Yes, they had police monkeys. But the first actual professional police force that was run by the government for the entire nation was in the 12th dynasty, Middle Kingdom Pharaoh Amenemhet, uh, who instituted an actual nationwide law enforcement organization. They still use dogs and monkeys, by the way, and the police officers could serve as prosecutors, interrogators, bailiffs, and of course they administered punishment. Now, you had the pharaoh who was the top dog, but most of the justice system, the head of that was the vizier. And he used to appoint the judges and a police chief, really. And then the police chief would appoint deputies, and the police chief was always an Egyptian. And he would appoint also sub chiefs for the different municipalities and areas and districts. And then those people would hire the local law enforcement. A lot of them did end up being Nubians, and they did call them, the whole police force was called Magi, which just went back to the original Nubians that handled this. So now, as far as if you get charged with a crime or apprehended for a crime, there was a judicial system. Now, as it turns out, for minor stuff, petty theft, if you were caught red-handed, the police could administer your punishment then and there without having to go through the system, usually a good old-fashioned ass whooping. But anything that really needed to be adjudicated would go through the judicial system. Now, so the vizier was in charge of that. Your pharaoh was the top judge. He's like the supreme court. And the vizier is the top judge. Vizier appoints all the judges across the land at the different levels. You'll have municipal, religious, territorial magistrates that would be judges paid by the government. They worked for the government as judges. So now, also, the judges handled other things other than crimes. As it turns out, they did do a lot of lawsuits in ancient Egypt, and they could handle inheritances and whatnot. And a lot of times, if you brought a lawsuit against somebody, it could go all the way up to the king, the supreme judge. And as it turns out, you could file lawsuits against the pharaoh. Don't know how successful they were, but you could do that. Now, as far as the criminal process, as an Egyptian, what happens? You commit a crime, you're apprehended for it, and you had to face justice. You did have some rights. You were guilty until proven innocent in ancient Egypt. They seized you, you were guilty. And you actually wore that badge, no matter how it was adjudicated. You had a right to a speedy trial. As a matter of fact, a very, very speedy trial, because there were no jails in ancient Egypt. You know, if they needed to hold you for a little bit, somebody was assigned to you. You may have been held somewhere. But other than that, it was done right away. You know, there were no lawyers. You were in charge of your own defense, but you did have the right to call witnesses and present evidence in your defense. You also had the one big right, and a lot of this is tied to their religion. You had the right to tell the truth as the accused. The reason for this is, if you're guilty, it is in your best interest to go ahead and tell the truth and confess and face your punishment here and still have a chance to make it to the afterlife. Not everybody will get that chance. We'll go over that in a minute, because we're going to look at a trial document and see what happened to some people. Now, also, your witnesses had the right to tell the truth for the same reason. If they lie or present any false evidence or false accusations, they could face judgment and not get to the afterlife. So whatever happened here could affect your court officials, same thing. There was a huge religious component. It was in their best interest to find the truth and not be corrupt. Stay till the end of the harem conspiracy papyrus, and you'll see how they deal with corruption. Now, they did interrogate an accused person, and a lot of times we will say it's an enhanced interrogation, and it involved physical harm to some degree and beating. And as it turns out, if they did it long enough and you maintained your innocence, they would set you free. They would say, oh, you're innocent. There's no way in hell you're not going to admit to this. I don't know how often that happened, but it definitely had happened. Now, you could be found innocent, but somehow it seems like no matter what, you're always known as a former criminal, whether you did it or not. That's just the way they did it. It kind of haunted you. And sentences would range from exile, banishment, to a severe beating, to body parts being cut off, to the ultimate, which is, execution. So, lucky for everybody, there is a record of a trial, and probably as far as ancient Egypt is concerned, this would have been the trial of the millennium. And it's called the Judicial Turin Papyrus, and it covers the court proceedings of people involved in what's known as the harem conspiracy. This has happened under Ramses III, and I'll give you an idea of what the actual crime is, but that's not the part we're interested in. We're interested in the judicial process, but you should know what was going on. And a lot of content has been made about the harem conspiracy. If you want to see one, go look at one of the channels. It's all good. The truth is, there's no great detail report of what exactly went down that day, but there's enough in the trial documents that you could kind of get an idea of what happened. Also, Ramses III's mummy has been found, and forensic examination of the mummy also tells us what happened. But in a nutshell, here it goes. Ramses III, suffering kind of a low approval rating, and he, of course, had a harem of several wives. But there was the great wife, the Hemet, and that would what you would be called the queen, and she had a son, and that was the heir apparent. And then he had another queen in the harem, another wife named Tai, and Tai also had a male son. So he was in line, but he wasn't the heir apparent. And from what can be gleaned from the trial, really, is apparently Tai and Pentaweret had kind of gotten a bunch of people together to do a coup on the government, take out Ramses, possibly the great wife and the heir apparent, and they thought this would be a good thing. So and install her son Pentaweret as the king. Okay, so from what we can tell, they were successful in getting Ramses. According to the forensic examination of his mummy, he was done in Game of Thrones Red Wedding style, knife to the abdomen and the throat. So while they were successful in that aspect, apparently the rest of it wasn't, because Ramses' firstborn son did survive, and so did the queen, and we have a very lengthy trial to go through. So let's kind of go through how this went down. And this is a pretty good record. You can find it online, and they translate the papyrus for you. And it's just kind of interesting. They kind of go through, there's a preamble, and it's kind of like in the words of the king, and I don't know if this is supposed to be Ramses himself in spirit, or if it's Ramses' son, who is now the king, because according to his mummy, he didn't make it. And it just, little preamble, and then it says, I commissioned the overseer of the White House, Mentemtawi, the overseer of the White House, Pefroi, the standard bearer, Kara, the butler, Pebes, the butler, Kedendena, the butler, Maharbal, the butler, Pyerna, the butler, Thutrek Nefer, the king's herald, Penrimnut, the scribe, Mai, the scribe of the archives, Paramhab, and the standard bearer of the infantry, Hori. Okay, so a military officer. And he basically commands them, go and examine everybody and, execute punishment upon those who are found guilty. And, anybody who's innocent, let them go. To this whole thing. Now, so it reads like this. Persons brought in because of the great crimes which they had committed and placed in the court of examination before the great nobles of the court of examination, that they might be examined by, the overseer of the White House, Mentemtawi, the overseer of the White House, Pefroi, the standard bearer, Kara, the butler, Pebes, the scribe of the archives, Mai, the standard bearer, Hori. So there's a magistrate overseeing, or Ramses' son may be overseeing this himself. And then basically you have a panel of peers of these people from the palace. So these are people that were not involved in the conspiracy, and they're going to be involved in the examination and the passing of judgment on these other people. And then it names, I'm going to read you the first whole one, and then they're basically the same. It names a person and their charge and how they were found. So the first one is the great criminal Pepekamun, formerly chief of the chamber. You'd be surprised how much staff is in the palace. I'm just going to let you know that right now. He was brought in because of his collusion with Tai and the women of the harem. He made common cause with them and began bringing out their words to their mothers and their brothers who were there, saying, stir up the people, incite enemies to hostility against their lord. He was placed before the great nobles of the court of examination. They examined his crimes. They found out that he had committed them. His crime seized him. The nobles who examined him brought his judgment upon him. Now, every last one of these people, the judgment in the sentence is execution. And then there's a little change A difference between common people and nobles, and you'll see that in a second. You also have the great criminal Mesejure, formerly the butler, same charge. The great criminal Paynok, formerly overseer of the king's harem in some way, same charge, same sentence. The great criminal Pendua, formerly the scribe of the king's, something to do with the harem. Parts of these are papyrus are missing little words. Same charges, same outcome. The great criminal Petun Teamun. Some of these are hard to pronounce. Formerly inspector of the harem. Now, his is a little different because he knew what was happening, he heard what was going on, and did not report them. Okay? So there's a big difference. He wasn't involved, but simply because he knew it was happening and didn't say anything, guess what? Guilty and sentenced. Then you have the great criminal Kirpez, formerly inspector of the harem. Now, interesting to point out that no matter who you are, when you are accused of a crime, you lose all your titles. That's why everybody, one of these guys is formerly somebody. He was also knew what was going on, didn't say anything. The great criminal Kamopet, formerly inspector of the harem, same thing. He knew what was going on, didn't say anything. The great criminal Kamamali, formerly inspector of the harem, same thing. Great criminal Setim Perthoth, formerly inspector of the harem, same thing. See, these are all people who knew what was going on, didn't say anything. Great criminal Setim Peramamun, formerly inspector of the harem, same thing. These are all guilty, by the way, and sentenced to the ultimate punishment. The great criminal Werin, who was a butler, formerly a butler, he also knew what was happening and didn't say anything. Guilty, sentenced. The great criminal Eshabed said, formerly assistant of Pebekamun, also because he knew what was going on with Pebekamun and didn't say anything. The great criminal Paluka, formerly butler and scribe of the White House, he was brought in because he colluded with Pebekamun and knew what was going on, didn't do anything. The great criminal, the Libyan Yanini, formerly a butler, same thing. He knew what was going on, didn't say anything. Now, all these people were dispatched. And then you also have the wives of the people of the harem who united with the men when the things were discussed, who were placed before the nobles of the court of examination, found guilty, and brought their punishment upon them. They are not named. They're 6 women. Now, you also have the great criminal Pere, son of Ruma, formerly overseer of the White House. He was brought in because of collusion with great criminal. Also, he was involved and complicit and gone. Now, check this out. They kind of branched out. They had evidence, not just witness testimony. The great criminal Benamwese, formerly captain of the archers in Nubia, military officer from Nubia. He was brought in because of the letter which his sister, who was in the harem, so he's captain of the archers in Nubia, and his sister is one of the king's ladies there, had written to him saying, incite the people to hostility, and come thou to begin hostility against thy lord. He was placed before Kenana Maharbal Pursun and Thutret Knefer. They examined him, they found him guilty, and they punished him. Now, those were commoners. Okay, now we're going to get to the nobility, and this includes one of the king's sons, Pentaweret. Now, persons brought in because of their crimes and because of their collusion with Pebekamen, Payez, and Pentaweret. They were placed before the nobles of the court of examination in order to examine them, and they found them guilty. They left them in their own hands. In the court of examination, they took their own lives, and no punishment was executed upon them. So, here's the thing. You have Pentaweret, who is the son of the king, which means he's semi-divine, they couldn't execute him. He had to take care of that himself, if you know what I mean. Now, did he willingly do it? Well, I'm going to show you a picture of his mummy, and it doesn't look like he went willingly. There's rope marks on his neck, things like that. And maybe he had some encouragement. But here's the thing. He had to, being semi-divine, he had to go to the next life. Now, according to this mummy, which is known as Unknown Man E, and they've decided this is Pentaweret, they gave him a really crappy embalming, a very insulting one. So even though he's royalty, they just kind of sent him to the other side as not royalty. So when they knew there was no getting out of it, he's not going to lie or get any help at the judgment. I even wrapped him in a goat skin instead of linens. Okay, so when they say they took their own lives and no punishment was executed on them, they had encouraged them to this. But the nobility, they would have been committing a crime had they performed the executions themselves. Okay? Let's go who all these people are. And they all suffered the same thing. The great criminal Paez, formerly commander of the military. The general. Whoops, that's a high-up guy. The great criminal Masui, formerly scribe of the House of Sacred Writings. This guy's a noble. Scribes were like the PhDs of Egypt. They were held in high regard. The great criminal Parakamenef, formerly chief. The great criminal Eroi, formerly overseer of the House of Sekhmet. The great criminal Nebsafi, formerly butler. The great criminal Shedmesser, formerly scribe of the House of Sacred Writings. And that's a total of 6, they said at the end, that they just went ahead and did themselves in. But now, we're going to get to Pentaweret. He's mentioned persons who were brought in because of their crimes to the court of examination before Kenanmaya, Maharbal, Pirsun, Thutra-Knefer, and Mertu Samun. They examined them concerning their crimes. They found them guilty. They left them in their place. They took their own lives. And the first one, Pentaweret, we already discussed him. He was brought in because of his collusion with Tai, his mother. When she discussed the words with the women of the harem, being hostile against his lord, he was placed before the butlers in order to examine him. They found him guilty, and you know what happened there. The great criminal Henetunamon, formerly butler. Now, he was a noble, apparently as a butler, and his crime was he heard all this going on, didn't say anything, and he passed his own sentence, shall we say. The great criminal Pere, formerly scribe of the kings, and that little part is missing, and he also knew what was going on, didn't say anything, and he was allowed to pass his own sentence. Now, interesting side note, the part we've all been waiting for. This is an interesting end to this. And listen to this. Persons upon whom punishment was executed by cutting off their noses and their ears because of their forsaking the good testimony delivered to them. The women had arrived at their place of abode, and had there caroused with them with Paez. Their crime seized them. Okay? Here's what happened. Apparently, some of the officers of the court had a visit from some of the ladies of the harem that were being accused, brought by a couple of the harem people who were accused, and were led out by some of the guards in charge of guarding them to come and, shall we say, bribe some of the officials. And these people had their ears and nose cut off because they were being bribed to, say, not believe certain testimony and set some people free. And these people are The great criminal Peebles, formerly butler. He decided to pass sentence on himself in the ultimate way. But here's some people who had their noses and ears cut off. The great criminal Mai, formerly scribe of the archives. Mai was an officer of the court. And now, at the end, they found out that he was getting bribed, shall we say. Now he's the former scribe, missing some ears and a nose. The great criminal Tanyakde, formerly officer of the infantry. He was a guard, guarding the girls. And the great criminal Onene, formerly captain of the police. So he allowed this to happen. These girls to go and bribe Mai and Pius. Or Peebles. Now, another guy's mentioned. Person who had been connected with them, they had contended with him with evil and violent words. He was dismissed. Punishment was not executed on him. The great criminal Hori, who was standard bearer of the infantry. So apparently, Hori, they tried to do this to Hori, and he told them to pound sand, and he had no punishment. He still got his ears and his nose, still alive, and but now he's referred to as a criminal because he was accused of this, but still part of the criminal proceedings. Odd. And he's now the former standard bearer. See, all he had to do was get accused of this, even though he was proven innocent. You're still darn criminal. So, that's how things worked in ancient Egypt. Please subscribe. My subscriber button's a little lonely. Also, if you liked it, please give me a like. If you have a comment, please leave a comment down below. Give your opinion, ask me a question, anything you want to talk about. I really appreciate it. Other than that, till next time, thank you very much, and goodbye.